Welcome back to the Legal Ease Show. We have something very special for you today. You'll see that we have a couple of guns, a couple of firearms on the table. We're going to talk about those and how they relate to law.
Well, hello, my name is Gregory Treat, and this is our host, Ryan Peabody. This is the Legal Ease Show. So, Ryan, what are we going to be talking about today?
All right, today is a great episode. I've been really looking forward to talking about this because I get so many questions and there's so many enthusiasts with firearms. We're going to be talking about gun trusts. We're going to be talking about what gun trusts are and how they work, what firearms should be in there, and I have examples today of what non-gun trust type firearms are and what gun trust firearms are. So the first thing I like to do, as you know, is define our terms. Gun trust is kind of a common way to describe a trust that holds firearms. They're really NFA trusts, National Firearms Act. And what we're specifically talking about are Class 3 firearms, which are firearms that are regulated by the NFA.
So we talk about a lot of different projects that are high legal, they're very complex, and so we oftentimes will recommend people don't do this at home. But I think you wanted to give a little bit more serious warning about people if you were to ever try to do a DIY gun trust. Why is that?
We see kind of the do-it-yourself legal pretty commonly with very simple things or things that can be simple, like a power of attorney or a simple will, or maybe someone will incorporate an LLC or some other company by themselves, and that's fine. People can certainly get on the internet and do law. It's always better to hire an expert or an attorney that practices in these areas, and I hope that's obvious. But with a gun trust in particular, you really have to be careful because there are criminal implications here. If you get this wrong, you could pay huge fines. You could actually go to prison, and so we want to kind of unpack what these are. So if you're thinking about doing a gun trust, and you may have a better idea of if you even need one by the time we finish the episode today, please find an attorney that actually does gun trusts and that has experience with this in the state that you live in to get this done. The gun trusts that the firm puts together have like 15 different documents involved, including the trust itself and a lot of these other peripheral documents, to make sure that we are compliant with federal law, with state law, and we're taking everything into account and we stay up on these type of things. So if you're thinking about a gun trust, DIY is not the way to go. You want to be very careful with these.
Well, and so I think one of the things that's different about gun trusts is for a lot of filings, you make a filing when you incorporate a business, for instance. In many states, the process is wholly automatic or is a matter of checking the box. And so people will interact with their Secretary of State and they'll get paperwork saying you filed this. That is not what happens when you're dealing with a gun trust. You actually have to engage with ATF, is that correct?
Yeah, with the federal government, with the ATF. So let's differentiate between Class 3 firearms and non-Class 3 firearms. So a Class 3 firearm is there's three basic categories that these fall into, which are fully automatic. So a fully automatic differentiated from a semi-automatic is when you pull the trigger, more than one bullet is discharged at a time. That's going to be a full automatic. So you can pull the trigger and the entire magazine empties out of the gun. That's full automatic. It is legal to own these. You can't be a felon. You can't have a history of mental illness. You can't have a laundry list of disqualifiers. And I'm not going to go through all of them. You can look it up, or you can get with somebody that knows what they're doing, and they'll be able to give you guidance on this, like we would.
Right.
That's a full auto. It's Class 3, so you have to get permission from the ATF. I'll get into that in just a second. The other two primary categories are short barrel rifles and shotguns, and silencers, which and I'm going to show you examples of what these look like today. And silencers they're really more of a suppressor is really more of an accurate term. But those are the three categories where you can own these things if you're not disqualified, but you have to get permission from the ATF through government paperwork. They run background checks, and depending on what it is and kind of the timing of it, it can take anywhere from about 6 or 7 months to over a year to get approval to actually take possession of these through a federal firearms license holder that has a Class 3 endorsement.
Right. So these pistols right here, are these Class 3 firearms?
So these are not. I have two examples here. I'm going to scoot in and I'll show you. These are unloaded, and obviously, because we're using them just as props today, we're not going to actually fire anything. And so this is an HK. This is just a handgun. It's a semi-automatic, so one trigger pull, one bullet comes out. And this does not require ATF approval. You can go out and purchase one of these at your local gun dealer. Again, as long as you're not a felon or other disqualifiers.
At least that's the rules here in Texas.
That's the rules here in Texas. Yep. That's a really good point. If you're not here in Texas, or you are, you always want to be very aware of your state laws, your local laws, the federal laws, before you purchase any firearm, particularly a Class 3. I also have an example of a Glock here. This is again going to be a semi-automatic. This one happens to be a .45 caliber. It's a Glock 21, and great firearm, very popular. A lot of law enforcement use these. This is not a Class 3 firearm. It is not. So I will show you an example of something that is. So let me go ahead and bring those examples out right now.
All right.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you are what a silencer looks like. Again, it's typically, it's more accurately referred to as a suppressor. It suppresses sound. So I have one right here. This is a small one for a 22. Mm-hmm. And the federal government does regulate these. There's talk of legislation all the time that they may deregulate these, and you can own these because you have a lot of hunting enthusiasts or other people that are collectors and the like that want to own these to silence the noise, and there have been arguments for not damaging your hearing and things like this. But at this time, these are required to have approval from the ATF as a Class 3 firearm. Here's another example of a suppressor that would be used on a larger caliber rifle, mm-hmm. typically.
So
these are pretty popular.
Just to be clear, if you had a weapon, a firearm that was not otherwise regulated, and you got a suppressor for that was designed for that weapon, you would need to register the silencer with the ATF. It would be considered a Class 3 firearm, even though the gun that it's designed for was not.
Yeah, that's a really good differentiation, and that's correct. So I'm going to show you the actual full automatic firearms here in a second, but let's really kind of talk about what a gun trust is good for. Mm-hmm. So a gun trust is just what it sounds like. It is a very specialized trust that has all the proper language in it that incorporates federal, state, and local law language into that trust. And so you can buy a Class 3 firearm in three different ways. You can own one as an individual, so you put in the application with the ATF as an mm-hmm. individual, and then you own that firearm, and you can use and transport it yourself as an individual person. You can own it through an entity like an LLC, and then you can also own it through a trust. So my least favorite among the group is as an individual, because it is restricted. If your heirs can inherit that particular firearm, they would have to go through a very long, very detailed process that I've seen errors come up all the time.
Mm-hmm. Very cumbersome.
I've seen probates of very substantial estates and very small estates get all hung up and delayed because of one item that happens to be a Class 3 firearm. It's very tricky.
Well, so what would happen if you didn't have a trust and you go into your relative's house and you find a Class 3 firearm? Well, if you don't have a trust, what do you do?
You're really supposed to engage with a federal firearms license holder with that Class 3 endorsement, and they're the ones that should be handling, transporting that particular firearm prior to you becoming an authorized user of that and owner of that firearm.
So you'd have to go find a gun dealer, convince them to come to your grandfather's or father's house and take possession of the firearm.
That would be the safest, most legal way to do things, and you definitely want to be compliant with these sorts of things.
Sure, absolutely, but very cumbersome, right?
Yeah, it's cumbersome. It can be expensive, and a lot of times these Class 3 firearms are very expensive. They're tens of thousands of dollars. So you can also own one of these with an entity such as an LLC. And I would discourage the use of an LLC to own a firearm unless you're in the business. So if you're a firearms dealer and you're buying and selling firearms, or you're using Class 3 firearms to go out and put on experiences where people can shoot these sorts of weapons, that's fine. You can own it with an LLC, but you got to be careful with the LLC because you have to make sure, in the state of Texas at least, you have to make sure your comptroller filing is up to date every single year, and you're paying the taxes so the entity is not disregarded. Because the second that an entity is disregarded for some other way, you become in illegal possession of that firearm. Not good. So we want to avoid that. If you're running a business, own it through the LLC, that's fine. I don't like it owning through an individual because it's highly restrictive on to be able to bequest that through an estate or to even let other people use that firearm. My favorite is for the individual enthusiast is the gun trust. So it's where the trust actually is the owner and you are the authorized individual for that. So your title is going to be the trustee, or you can have co-trustees. You can nominate subsequent trustees or co-trustees that have legal authority to access and control, and in some cases transport that firearm, like to the gun range, back to your place of residence, things like that.
So
again, don't transport across state lines. You have to get permissions for that. I'm not going to get into the weeds on all the regulations, but owning a firearm and registering it with the ATF through the gun trust is definitely my suggestion on what people do.
Right, so again, without a gun trust, if your wife drives your vehicle back home or drops you off and there's a Class 3 firearm, then she's breaking the law.
That's correct. She would be breaking the law as somebody that is not an authorized person, that has not had the background check or anything like that with the ATF, and that would be against the law. So yes, if she gets pulled over and she's transporting that for you, she could be arrested, could go to jail, could suffer fines, and those are the kind of things that we definitely don't want to get trapped with. We want to avoid that kind of stuff, obviously. So those are the ways to own these firearms, and let me show you some examples here.
Cool. So we're talking about the fully automatic.
So what I have here is I have an M16. And this is a full auto firearm. This particular firearm is in a gun trust, and it has been
duly registered.
It has been duly registered, and all the paperwork is up to date and correct on it. But this would be this one's unloaded again for our purposes today. We're just using it as an example. But it would be something that you could go to the range or go to a safe location. Safety is obviously going to be top of the list for everything. And use this. This would be one trigger pull, and it would dispense the entire magazine if it were loaded. So this is a great example of what a full auto looks like. And I do have one more here. All right, let's see. Here I have an example of a short-barreled shotgun. It has a 9-inch barrel. And this would be an example of a short barrel that is a Class 3 and requires registration with the ATF. And most people that own these are gun enthusiasts or collectors. They use them just for entertainment purposes.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is that a gun trust does not give you more rights than you would otherwise have as an individual. It allows for ease of transportation, for ease of transfer between people upon death, or if you're selling it. But it doesn't allow you to own things that are totally illegal.
That's correct. The ownership requirements are going to be the same to own these firearms as you were an individual or a gun trust or an LLC or whatever the instrument is that you are using to own these. So you don't gain extra rights. You still have to get the background check. The federal government's involved. Your local law enforcement is notified. There's all these requirements that an attorney that actually does gun trusts knows about and can help you with.
So I think we were also going to talk about that there's certain weapons or firearms or tools that are not regulated by Class 3 firearm. They're not Class 3 firearms, but they are also not things that you necessarily want to own yourself or have thrown into your probate. One of the other things we haven't talked about.
Okay, yeah, that's a great point. So I get this question all the time: is should I put non-Class 3 firearms like the handguns that we showed a couple of minutes ago into a gun trust? I like putting non-Class 3 firearms into a gun trust, even if it has Class 3 or it doesn't have Class 3. I like to separate all firearms into a very special instrument, a very special trust. So if you have a will, or if you have a standard revocable trust, that would be like a family revocable trust, something like that. I like to have a separate trust just for firearms. And you don't necessarily have to have these non-Class 3 firearms in a trust to give them to your heirs properly. But I like it because of the uncertainty and the changing nature of gun laws. Mm-hmm. I see gun laws or gun legislation or proposed legislation comes up all the time. It's very frequent. And these trusts are really designed to account for the change in the laws and still be able to own and transport and bequest these firearms, which again can be very valuable. I mean, I know I have clients that have a great many guns, mm-hmm. sometimes dozens, or sometimes even over 100 different firearms that are not Class 3, and they've spent a lot of money on these over the years. Some of them they've inherited from their parents, and it's kind of been passed through the generations. And I really like the idea of putting these firearms into an NFA trust that contains all this very special language and that avoids any future potential pitfalls with changes of the law or how the government approaches and interacts with gun owners.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that covers almost everything that we wanted to talk about, and we've discussed what gun trusts are, how why you shouldn't do it yourself, what types of guns. So, well, actually, is there anything else that we have, Ryan?
I've got to go get it, but I do have one more item that I'd like to share today and to point out as it's not a Class 3 instrument. All right, what we have here is a flamethrower. Now, I don't get this question very often, but every once in a while, is it legal to own a flamethrower? The answer is varied, so let me unpack it by saying this. Flamethrowers are not federally regulated at this time. There are, in 48 states, it is legal to own a flamethrower. If you're going to own one of these, if you're going to use and operate one, you'd really need to look into your state laws on this. State laws, local laws, like for example, the state of Maryland prohibits flamethrowers altogether. The state of California, you have to get permission from the fire marshal. And the states vary. The laws in each state vary from state to state. A lot of times you'll see flamethrowers like this being regulated under code sections that deal with fireworks or other sort of like burning ordinances. And you really need to kind of look into those, and a lot of times they'll be in odd places. So if you're going to own one of these, please do your research, figure out if it is legal to own it, where you can own it, and what the applications for it are if you're actually going to use it. But it's a unique item. We happen to have one here today, and so we wanted to highlight the fact that we have a flamethrower here in the studio. So that's all we've got for today on the episode about gun trusts, what you can own, how you can own them, and I hope you found this to be helpful. If you did, please like it and subscribe and share this with your gun enthusiast friends. Thanks very much, and see you next time.
Thanks for watching The Legalese Show.